On prom night, my stepmother smiled. Fix your dress. Behind the gym, she taught me a lesson in silence with a fist to my gut. 16 years later, I'm the chief compliance officer at Ravenfield Logistics, facing her across a boardroom table as they try to fire me for a data breach. I meet her gaze and say, "I've fixed my dress. Now, it's time to fix the truth. My name is Nora Whitfield. I am 34 years old, and tonight, I am a ghost in a glass cage." The boardroom of Ravenfield Tower is on the 48th floor, a sterile observatory overlooking a city that glitters with a cold, indifferent beauty. The conference table is a slab of polished obsidian, so dark it reflects our faces like a deep well. My own reflection is a pale oval, framed by the blue-white glow of the LED screen behind me, where the words "Emergency Session" are projected in a font that is both calming and absolute. They use that font for everything, from quarterly earnings reports to termination notices. It's a font designed to preclude argument. They want to fire me tonight. The agenda is concise. Contractor data breach. Proposed suspension of N. Whitfield. Across from me sits Dahlia, my stepmother, the company's acting chief operating officer. Her face, framed by a severe, expertly tailored blazer, is a mask of concerned authority, but her eyes, the same pale gray as a winter sky, hold the exact same smile they did 16 years ago. It's a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. It only curves the lips, a sharp, precise weapon. The air in the room is thick with the scent of ozone from the electronics and the faint, expensive perfume Dahlia wears. It smells nothing like the past, but the past is here anyway. It rises like a phantom limb, an ache of memory. 16 years ago, Grayford High School, the gymnasium doors are propped open, spilling a syrupy, golden light onto the damp grass of the football field. The sound of a bad cover band thumps a clumsy rhythm into the humid May air. I can still smell it, the cloying sweetness of cheap hairspray, the sharp tang of floor varnish from the freshly polished gym court, and the earthy scent of wet soil clinging to the hem of my pale blue satin dress. It was a dress that cost too much and fit too poorly, a constant source of friction against my skin. I was 18, clutching a corsage of wilting gardenias and baby's breath. The petals were already starting to brown at the edges. Dahlia leaned in close, her breath a warm cloud of gin and mints against my ear. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper, meant only for me. "The Whitmire boy is looking over here. Nora, stand up straight. Don't embarrass me." Her fingers, tipped with immaculate crimson nails, went to the thin satin strap of my dress. She adjusted it, a gesture that looked motherly from a distance, but up close, I felt the press of her thumbnail digging a sharp crescent into the soft skin of my shoulder. It was a tiny, private act of violence, a reminder of ownership. Her smile was a paper-thin thing, stretched taut over her teeth. It was the same smile she wore now, presenting a stack of printed emails to the board. A smile that promised pain was a form of correction, a necessary lesson. "The evidence is quite clear," she says in the present, her voice smooth as polished stone. She slides a single sheet of paper from the stack and pushes it across the obsidian table toward me. It glides silently, coming to a stop directly in front of my folded hands. My name is at the top, followed by a timestamp, 2:13 a.m., an unauthorized access log, a digital footprint leading from my encrypted credentials directly to a secure server holding personnel files, a server I didn't access. This breach compromises the integrity of our bidding process and exposes us to significant liability, Dahlia continues, addressing the 4 other board members. "As acting COO, I must recommend an immediate, indefinite suspension for Nora, pending a full internal and external investigation." I look at the paper, but I see the football field. I see the dark space behind the bleachers, where the shadows were deep enough to swallow you whole. That's where she took me after adjusting my dress. The music from the gym became a muffled, distant pulse. The world shrank to the space between us, her face illuminated by the cold security light mounted on the gym's brick wall. "You think you're so clever," she had hissed, her smile finally gone, replaced by a tight, angry line. "You think your father will always be here to protect you." The first blow wasn't a slap. It was a hard, closed-fisted punch to my stomach. It knocked the air from my lungs in a silent, agonizing rush. I doubled over, my corsage crushed between us. The sharp plastic of the pin box dug into my wrist. I remember the surprise more than the pain, the sheer, shocking efficiency of it. She didn't yell. She didn't make a scene. It was a quiet, brutal transaction. "You will learn to be silent," she'd said, her voice perfectly even. "You will learn to fix your own dress and keep your mouth shut." I learned. I learned. I learned to breathe through the fire in my abdomen. I learned to swallow the coppery taste of blood that rose in the back of my throat. I learned to straighten up, to smooth the crushed satin of my dress, to repin the ruined flowers to my wrist. I learned to walk back into the golden light of the gymnasium, the humiliation folded away inside me, neat and sharp as a crease in a ledger. I learned that the most important records are the ones you keep in your own head, where no one else can access the logs. In the boardroom, the air conditioning hums, a low, constant drone. The other board members, Sterling, a man whose face seems permanently fixed in a state of weary disappointment, Croft, sharp and analytical, and the two younger ones brought in after the last merger, are looking at me. They are waiting for a defense, an explanation, a denial. They see Nora Whitfield, 34, the overachieving head of compliance, the data prodigy who clawed her way up from an entry-level analyst position. They see the woman who designs the very systems she's accused of violating. They don't see the girl behind the bleachers, but Dahlia does. She's counting on that girl still being there, the one who learned to swallow her pain and absorb the blow. She expects me to fold. Slowly, deliberately, I lift my hands from the table. My movements are measured, economical. I reach into the leather briefcase at my side and retrieve a small, square object. It's a velvet box, dark blue. Its plush surface worn smooth with age and handling. The edges are frayed, the color faded to a dusty gray in the harsh office lighting. I place it on the table. It makes a soft, definitive sound against the polished surface. The box sits between me and the damning printout, a relic from another world. It's the box my corsage came in that night, the box that dug into my wrist as I gasped for air on the wet grass. Dahlia's eyes flicker toward it, for the first time this evening. A crack appears in her serene facade. It's almost imperceptible. A slight tightening around her mouth, a subtle dilation of her pupils. She recognizes it. The memory is not just mine, it's ours. A secret contract written in pain and sealed in silence. For 16 years, she believed I was honoring my side of the agreement. "Mr. Sterling clears his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Nora, do you have a response to the allegations?" I don't look at him. My gaze is locked on Dahlia. I am no longer the girl behind the gym. I am the architect of this room. I understand its foundations, its stresses, its vulnerabilities. I know that power isn't just about delivering a blow. It's about timing. It's about choosing the moment to reveal that you recorded the impact. I let the silence stretch, letting them feel the weight of it. I let Dahlia remember the feel of that night, the absolute certainty of her control. I let her feel it slipping away. Finally, I speak. My voice is calm, clear, and carries the precise, unwavering tone of a compliance officer stating an immutable fact. "Before you vote," I say, my eyes sweeping over each member of the board before landing, once more, on my stepmother. "Let's hear the full story." The silence in the boardroom stretches, thin and fragile as a spider's thread. Dahlia's face is a carefully composed landscape of indignation, but her eyes, those cold gray chips of flint, are fixed on the small velvet box. She knows my story begins there, and for the first time, she doesn't control the telling of it. I draw a breath, the air tasting of refrigerated, recycled victory, and I begin to narrate the glossy, hollow history of the perfect Ravenfield family. It began, as all good corporate alliances do, with a merger. My father, Richard Whitfield, a brilliant but emotionally vacant architect of logistics, married Dahlia 2 years after my mother lost her quiet, dignified battle with cancer. The official story was a whirlwind romance, a second chance at happiness for a grieving CEO. The truth, visible to anyone who looked closely, was a strategic acquisition. Dahlia wasn't just a widow with a charming smile. She was the daughter of a regional freight magnate whose roots and contracts my father had coveted for years. Their wedding photograph hangs in the main lobby of this building, just past security. It's an institution, a landmark for new employees on their orientation tours. Richard and Dahlia, framed in brushed steel, smiling against the backdrop of a setting sun. It doesn't look like a wedding portrait. It looks like the cover of an annual report. My father's hand rests on her waist, a gesture not of affection, but of possession. Her smile is bright, proprietary. It's a declaration that the Whitfield and Raven dynasties were now one. My mother's portrait was moved to the West Wing, near the accounting department, a silent, demoted subsidiary. With this merger came new assets. The most prominent was Ivy, Dahlia's daughter. Ivy arrived at Ravenfield Logistics the summer after her freshman year of college, presented to the company not as a product of nepotism, but as a uniquely talented communications prodigy. She was installed in the public relations department, where her primary skills, a deep understanding of Instagram filters and an intuitive grasp of performative sincerity, were put to immediate use. Ivy didn't build campaigns. She curated vibes. She was beautiful, effervescent, and utterly devoid of substance, which made her a marketing genius. She could sell ice in a blizzard, and she knew that people don't buy what you do. They buy why you do it, or at least, the story you tell them about why you do it. My own entry into the family business was less glamorous. I didn't glide in through the front door. I came in through the server room. I earned my spot in a competitive data analytics program, then spent 3 years in the windowless basement of internal audit. My world was spreadsheets, server logs, and statistical anomalies. I learned the company's real story, the one written in shipping manifests and expense reports, while Ivy was crafting heartwarming narratives about our long-haul drivers for social media. I was tracing fuel card discrepancies that showed those same drivers were miles from where their logs claimed they were. I was methodical, quiet, and good at my job. I rose through the ranks not because of my name, but because I could find the single broken number in a sea of data. I didn't curate vibes. I audited them. Our family dinners were board meetings in disguise. We'd sit in the cavernous dining room of my father's house, a place of dark wood and lonely echoes, and we'd perform the ritual of family. Dahlia would preside, guiding the conversation like a seasoned moderator. My father would ask for our metrics. Ivy, what's the engagement on the Ravenfield Cares campaign? Up 12% week over week. Richard, she'd chirp, holding up her phone to show a graph. The post about sponsoring the Little League team in Dayton went viral. Over 50,000 impressions. Excellent. Brand visibility is key. He'd nod, a flicker of approval in his tired eyes. Then, he'd turn to me. Nora, what's new in compliance? I finalized the audit on the third-party maintenance contracts for the Fresno depot. I'd say, my voice flat, we found billing inconsistencies averaging 6%. I've implemented a new verification protocol. Silence. My father would take a slow sip of his wine. Dahlia would smile that thin, corrective smile. That's wonderful, dear. It's so important to have the details right. The unspoken message was clear. Ivy created value. I managed liabilities. We'd clink glasses in a toast to success. The sound sharp and empty, a hollow chime in a gilded cage. My father died on a Tuesday in October. A sudden, massive coronary that took him at his desk. It was a clean death. The doctor said, efficient, just like him. His passing was not so much a tragedy as it was a power vacuum, and Dahlia, ever the strategist, abhorred a vacuum. Before the funeral arrangements were even finalized, she had invoked an emergency proxy clause in my father's will, a clause I never knew existed. Citing the need for market stability and continuity of leadership, a hastily convened board appointed her acting COO. It was meant to be temporary, a placeholder, a bridge. But I knew Dahlia. She never built bridges she didn't intend to own. In the quiet chaos that followed, I went back to the only thing that made sense to me: the data. Grief felt too large, too abstract. Numbers were finite. They were true. I started digging, not with any specific suspicion, but with a deep, instinctual unease. I worked late, long after the tower had emptied, surrounded by the hum of servers, and that's when I found them, the Shadow Hall contracts. They were buried deep, attached as subledgers to legitimate accounts for port fees and international tariffs. A series of payments, small at first but growing in frequency and size, made out to a holding company I'd never heard of, RFL Consulting, an entity based in a tiny, business-friendly nation with impenetrable banking privacy laws. The contracts were for expedited nocturnal logistics, a service that didn't officially exist. The numbers were clean, the authorizations signed electronically with my father's credentials, but the dates were wrong. Some of the authorizations were time-stamped on days my father was documented as being overseas, in meetings I had the minutes for. While I was tracing these ghost shipments through the digital ether, Ivy was turning Ravenfield into a fairy tale. She orchestrated a massive influencer campaign. Lifestyle bloggers posted artful photos of our trucks against dramatic sunsets. Tech gurus praised our innovative, family-driven corporate culture. Ivy herself became the face of the brand, the beautiful, dynamic daughter carrying on her stepfather's legacy. She did interviews about sustainability, about corporate responsibility, about the importance of family. Every post, every story, was a layer of glittering paint over the rot I was uncovering in the foundations. And it worked. The market loves a good story more than it loves a good balance sheet. While I watched millions of dollars being siphoned into an offshore account, Ravenfield's regional stock price ticked steadily upward. We were a success story, a family weathering a storm, stronger than ever. Internally, we were hemorrhaging cash, and Dahlia was holding the bucket. It was during one of those late nights, staring at a falsified bill of lading, that the phrase echoed in my mind. "Fix your dress." It came to me with the force of a physical blow, just as it had all those years ago. That's what this was. All of it. Every time Dahlia had smiled sweetly and dismissed my audit concerns in a meeting, telling me I was getting lost in the weeds. Every time she'd redirected a budget proposal away from my compliance department and toward Ivy's PR slush fund. Every time my father told me to be more of a team player when I questioned a new, opaque vendor, they were all telling me the same thing. Fix the part of you that's showing. Hide the ugly truth. Straighten the crooked seams so no one sees the flaw. Don't embarrass us. I started counting the instances, creating a mental ledger that stretched back years. Fix your dress was the time Dahlia told me my analysis of a potential acquisition was too aggressive. Fix your dress was when she suggested I take a vacation after I flagged a suspicious pattern of inventory write-offs. It was a language of control, refined from the crude, physical grammar of a punch behind a gymnasium to the sophisticated, deniable syntax of corporate power. She hadn't changed her methods, she had just scaled them. The goal was the same: silence, compliance, and the maintenance of a perfect, profitable facade. She thought she had taught me my lesson well that night on the wet grass. She was right. I had learned. I learned to be silent. I learned to watch. And I learned, most importantly, that if you fold a piece of paper enough times, the crease becomes permanent. My humiliation from that night wasn't gone. It was archived, preserved, and waiting for the day it would be entered into evidence. My voice in the boardroom is a low, steady instrument, cutting through the heavy silence. I am not defending myself. I am presenting a case. And every case begins with the first piece of evidence, the single thread that, when pulled, unravels the entire tapestry. For me, it was not a smoking gun, but a misplaced decimal point. It began on a Thursday night. 3 months ago, I was in my office, long after the last of the cleaning crew had wheeled their carts down the hallway. The only light was the cold blue glow of my 3 monitors, reflecting a cascade of numbers onto my face. I was conducting a routine quarterly audit of our freight subcontractors, a mind-numbing task of cross-referencing thousands of invoices against fuel logs and delivery receipts. It's the kind of work that lulls you into a trance, where your eyes glaze over and you rely on pattern recognition to catch anomalies. And then I saw it. Invoice number 7-143, from a mid-sized hauler out of Ohio. It was a standard overnight run to a distribution center in Chicago. Everything looked clean: mileage, weight, base rate, but there was a line item for a night highway surcharge. The formula was simple: base rate multiplied by a regional surcharge coefficient, which for that corridor was 0.11. But the final figure was wrong. It was inflated by a factor of 10. The software had calculated the surcharge by multiplying the rate by 1.1 instead of 0.11. It was a small amount, less than $200 on a $60,000 invoice. A rounding error, a typo, the kind of thing that usually gets flagged and corrected by accounts payable with a simple email. But it hadn't been. It had been approved and paid. My system is designed to catch exactly this kind of error, but the approval had been manually overridden. The override signature was electronic, belonging to a junior accounts manager. Curiosity is the engine of compliance. I flagged the manager's account and ran a search for similar overrides. I found 3 more over the past 6 months, all with the same 1.1 multiplier error, all for different contractors, a statistical improbability, a pattern. I pulled the full scanned PDFs of the 4 invoices and put them up on the main screen, side by side. The layouts were different, the company logos distinct, but my eyes were drawn to the small notes section at the bottom of each document. The font was unusual, a slightly condensed, almost elegant sans serif, with a peculiar, stylized capital G. It was the same on all 4 invoices, submitted by 4 supposedly independent companies. It was a digital fingerprint, a common source. My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. This was no longer about a typo. This was collusion. I went deeper, pulling the driver and vehicle data for each flagged shipment. The names and license plates were all different, all clean, except for one. On the original invoice, 7-143, the driver's name was listed as G. Peterson, a common enough name, but something about it snagged in my memory. I minimized the spreadsheet and opened a personal folder buried deep on my private drive, a place I hadn't visited in years. It was a folder of scanned memorabilia, old photos, concert tickets, and a receipt, a digital scan of a flimsy piece of carbon paper from a local Grayford florist, dated May 14, 2009. The order was for 1 gardenia corsage. The signature on the received by line was a hurried scrawl. Gary Peterson. He was the delivery driver who had brought the flowers to my house on the afternoon of my prom. The air left my lungs. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. But I didn't believe in them. Not in my world. In the world of data. Coincidence is just a pattern you haven't fully identified yet. The boy from 16 years ago who delivered the symbol of my humiliation was now the ghost driver on an invoice designed to defraud my company. The past wasn't just a memory. It was an active participant in the present. My hands moved with a new urgency, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The invoices had been submitted electronically through our contractor portal. Every submission creates a data packet, and every packet contains an IP address. It's a digital return address. Accessing the raw server logs required my highest level of clearance. At 1:47 a.m., I was in. I isolated the submission logs for the 4 invoices. The IPs were all different, masked by a series of relays, amateurs. I spent the next hour peeling back the layers of the proxies, tracing the connections back to their source. Finally, all 4 traces converged on a single origin point, a static IP address registered to a commercial entity in Creekmore, a sleepy suburb 30 miles west of the city. The entity was named RFL Consulting. The Ravenfield name was my burden, but it was also my key. A quick search on the state's business registry database gave me the incorporation documents for RFLC. It was listed as a logistics and management consultancy. Established 18 months ago, a single owner was listed on the registration. My blood went cold when I read the name, Maria Fletcher. Maria had been my father's end-of-life care nurse, a kind, matronly woman who had held my hand at the funeral and told me my father was finally at peace. A woman Dahlia had hired personally. Praising her compassion and professionalism, the woman who now owned the shell company that was systematically bleeding Ravenfield logistics dry. The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying speed. I followed the money. RFLC's payments from Ravenfield were routed through a primary commercial bank. But from there, I hit a wall. To go further, I'd have to breach it. Using a loophole in our company's financial software, a diagnostic backdoor I had designed myself for audit simulations, I accessed the interbank transfer records. The money didn't stay with RFLC. It was funneled, in regular, structured deposits, into a trust, the North Swale Trust. I ran the name through a legal database. The trust was established 7 days after my father's funeral. The timing was a punch to the gut. While I was grieving, they were incorporating, the beneficiaries were anonymous, hidden behind layers of legal protection, but the trustee, the person who managed the funds, was listed. It was Dahlia's personal estate lawyer. The fraud was elegant, methodical, and deeply personal. It was a closed loop, implicating my father's nurse, my stepmother's lawyer, and a ghost from my own past. But I was still missing the bridge, the piece of evidence that would connect the scheme directly to the family, to Dahlia and Ivy. I found it, as I often found Ivy's mistakes, on Instagram. I went through her feed, a nauseating gallery of curated perfection, and there it was, posted 2 months prior, a photo from a lavish charity gala. Ivy, draped in sequins, holding a champagne flute. Her arm is linked with a man in a tuxedo. He's smiling, his face flushed with alcohol. I ran his face through a facial recognition search. His name was Daniel Prentice. His LinkedIn profile listed him as the managing partner of RFL Consulting. The caption Ivy had written beneath the photo, a string of sparkling emojis beside it, read, "So proud of our amazing partners. We're not just a company, we're a family, family first." Family first. The irony was so profound it felt like a physical weight. That was the final confirmation. I spent the next 72 hours in a fugue state of controlled rage and meticulous work. I initiated a deep data scrape, pulling every file, every invoice, every email, every calendar invite, every electronic signature connected to RFLC, Maria Fletcher, the North Swale Trust, and the 4 colluding contractors. The final haul was 217 distinct files. I opened a new, encrypted spreadsheet. On my third monitor, I arranged the evidence. On the main screen, I began to build my case, line by excruciating line. Column A, date of transaction. Column B, invoice number. Column C, amount defrauded. Column D, authorizing signature. Column E, receiving entity. Column F, cross-reference to Ivy's social media activity on that date. Column G, note on Dahlia's calendar for that day. Each row I completed was another piece of the truth. It was a cold, brutal, and deeply satisfying process. The numbers didn't lie. The logs didn't forget. I was no longer the girl folding her humiliation into the pleats of a satin dress. I was a cartographer, mapping the geography of their greed. Each line of data was a stitch, pulling the fabric of their lies tighter and tighter. I was reinforcing the hem, making sure that this time, when the truth was finally revealed, nothing would come undone. I let the weight of my last statement settle in the room, the image of my meticulous spreadsheet hanging in the air like a death sentence. The board members looked from me to Dahlia, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning apprehension. They came here for a simple data breach, a clean corporate amputation. I've given them a family drama soaked in conspiracy. Dahlia, however, is a master of composure. She doesn't flinch. Instead, she offers a slow, pitying shake of her head, as if dealing with a troubled, delusional child. "This is a fascinating and elaborate story, Nora," she says, her voice dripping with condescending sympathy. "A truly impressive work of fiction, created, I can only assume, under immense personal stress. But we are not here to discuss your creative writing. We are here to discuss a verifiable fact." She gestures to the printout in front of me, the one with the 2:13 a.m. timestamp. "You've skillfully deflected, but the accusation on the table has nothing to do with accounting irregularities or family history. It's about a severe breach of federal law." Her counterattack, when it came, was swift and brutal. It began 48 hours ago. I had just finished compiling my files. The 217 pieces of evidence locked away on an encrypted, air-gapped drive. I was sitting in my office, planning my disclosure, debating whether to go to the board's independent chairman or directly to the SEC. I felt a cold sense of clarity, the quiet focus that comes before a storm. That's when the first email arrived. It was a formal notification from our chief legal officer. Arthur Vance, an anonymous whistleblower complaint had been filed. The accusation that I, the head of compliance, had used my system privileges to access the protected health information and medical records of several of our long-haul drivers, a flagrant HIPAA violation, a career-ending, potentially criminal act. I knew instantly it was a fabrication, but the sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They weren't just trying to discredit my financial findings, they were trying to paint me as a predator, a rogue agent violating the privacy of the very employees I was sworn to protect. It was a classic Dahlia move. She didn't just counter your argument, she sought to destroy your character. The corporate machinery she controlled moved with terrifying speed. Within an hour, a senior team from IT was at my office door. They were polite, almost apologetic, but their orders were clear. They imaged my hard drive and put a temporary suspension on my network credentials. Pending an expedited internal review, it was all perfectly procedural. Executed by the book, my book, I had written the protocols they were using against me. The verdict came the next morning. The IT director himself delivered the news, his face grim. "Nora, we found it," he said, avoiding my eyes. "A login from your primary workstation to the HR medical server. The timestamp is 2:13 a.m., Tuesday morning. A time I was verifiably at home, in bed." "That's impossible," I said, my voice flat. "Check the VPN logs. Check the building's keycard access records. I wasn't here." "The login wasn't remote," he said, sliding a report across his desk. "It originated from your machine, here in the office. It looks clean. All the security tokens match." He looked up, his expression one of genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, Nora." I knew then that I was dealing with something more sophisticated than a simple forged log. Back in my office, cut off from the company network, I did my own forensic scan on a sandboxed copy of my hard drive image. It took me 4 hours of peeling back layers of code, but I found it. A piece of malware hidden deep in the system registry, cloaked as a routine software update certificate. It was a remote access tool, a ghost client that allowed someone to perfectly mimic my credentials and operate my machine from anywhere in the world. I named it GhostSync. The installation signature was time-stamped a week prior, and it originated from a terminal with administrative privileges, a terminal registered to the Public Relations Department. Ivy? It was clumsy, arrogant work, but effective enough to fool a standard IT audit. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a new Instagram story from Ivy, a selfie of her at her desk, looking thoughtfully into the camera, a cup of herbal tea in her hand. The caption was a masterclass in passive aggression. "It's so important to practice what you preach. Everyone should learn the rules of compliance before trying to teach them to others." The final pieces of the trap clicked into place yesterday afternoon, a formal summons to an emergency board session. The subject? My immediate suspension. Dahlia wasn't just building a defense. She had launched a preemptive strike designed to neutralize me before I could ever present my own evidence. She was framing the narrative. I had discovered her scheme, and to create a smokescreen, I had committed a far worse crime myself. It was my word against a clean IT report. My phone buzzed discreetly on my lap under the boardroom table. A text message. It was from Arthur Vance, the legal officer. His message was 6 words long. They have the votes. Pushing tonight. I look up from the memory and back at Dahlia's confident, smiling face in the present. She believes she has won. The board looks uncomfortable, eager to end this. An accounting fraud is messy. A clear-cut data privacy violation, confirmed by IT, is simple. It allows them to act decisively, to preserve the integrity of the company. As you can see, Dahlia says, her voice resonating with authority. One of these stories is backed by forensic evidence. The other is a slanderous fantasy. The board has a fiduciary duty to act on the evidence. You are absolutely right, I say, my voice cutting through her monologue. We should focus on the evidence. My hand goes to the small, dark blue velvet box on the table. The room falls silent again. Every eye is on my hands as I lift the lid. There is no crushed corsage inside. There is no ghost of a flower. Instead, nestled in the faded satin lining, is a small, silver object. It's shaped like a gardenia, its metallic petals tarnished with age. But in the center, where the heart of the flower should be, is a tiny pinprick-sized hole. It's an old piece of spycraft, a novelty microphone from a 2009 catalog, designed to look like a lapel pin, a gift from my tech-obsessed cousin, given to me as a joke for my 18th birthday. A joke I had decided to wear on my prom dress. Confusion ripples through the room. Dahlia's smile falters, her eyes narrowing on the metal flower. I pick it up and retrieve a small adapter from my pocket. I lean forward and plug it directly into the audio in port for the room's main speaker system. A low hum fills the room as the connection is made. I open my laptop, click on a single audio file, and press play. The sound that emerges is distorted at first, a muffled cacophony of bad pop music and teenage laughter. It's the sound of the Grayford High prom, 16 years ago. Then, the soundscape changes abruptly. The music becomes a distant, thumping bass. There is the sound of damp grass, of a struggle, a sharp gasp of air, my gasp. And then, a voice that is young, but unmistakably Dahlia's. It is cold, clear, and stripped of all pretense. You will learn, the voice from the past says. And then, there is the sickening, dull thud of a fist hitting flesh, a choked sound. Then the counting. 1, a pause. 2, another pause, filled with my own ragged, desperate breathing. Shut your mouth. The final 3 words are not shouted. They are spoken with a chilling, precise venom. Each word is a perfectly articulated command. Each word is a nail hammered into the coffin of her lies. I stop the recording. The silence that follows is absolute, profound. It is heavier and more damning than any sound. The board members are frozen, their faces masks of shock. Mr. Sterling's mouth is slightly agape. Dahlia is staring at me, and for the first time since I was a child, the mask is gone. Her face is ashen, her confident smile evaporated, leaving behind only the stark, ugly truth. I meet her gaze across the table, across 16 years of carefully nurtured silence. A small smile touches my own lips. That night, I say, my voice steady and clear, you taught me to record everything. The ugly silence in the boardroom is broken only by the faint, high-pitched hum of the speakers, still connected to my laptop. The audio file has ended, but its ghost remains. Dahlia is a statue carved from ice, her composure finally, irrevocably shattered. The other board members stare, their faces a tableau of disbelief. They believe they have just heard the origin story of my revenge. They are only partially correct. They think this is the story of one victim. I need them to understand it's the story of many. That recording was the reason I started keeping records, I say, my voice steady in the ringing silence. "But it is not the foundation of the case against you. Dahlia, the foundation of that case is you. You built a system so rotten, so predicated on fear and exploitation, that it began to collapse under its own weight. You thought everyone was either a pawn or an obstacle. You never imagined some of them were witnesses. My real investigation, the one that led to the spreadsheet and the 217 files, didn't begin with a memory. It began with a phone call. 2 weeks ago. It was a blocked number. The woman on the other end was crying so hard I could barely understand her. It was Maria Fletcher, my father's nurse, the registered owner of RFL Consulting. They used my name, Nora, she sobbed, her voice a raw whisper of terror and guilt. I never wanted any part of this, I swear. She told me how Dahlia and her lawyer had approached her a month after my father's death. They presented it as an opportunity. They told her they were setting up a special fund, a way to reward a few key employees and manage my father's estate with maximum tax efficiency. They said it was what Richard would have wanted. They fed her a line about complex corporate structures and asked if they could register a small consulting firm in her name as a formality. They gave her a check for $50,000 for her trouble, calling it a gift from my father's estate, a token of his gratitude. She was a widow with a mountain of medical debt from her late husband. She was vulnerable, and they exploited her trust. I'm just a nurse, she cried. I didn't understand the papers I was signing. Then, last week, Mr. Prentice, the man from the company, he called me. He said I needed to keep quiet, that the company was going through a sensitive audit. He said you were trying to stir up trouble. When I saw the internal memo about your suspension today, I knew. They're using me to destroy you. She was terrified, but her conscience was stronger than her fear. Before she hung up, she said, There's something else. Your father. I don't think he trusted her either. He was getting suspicious. An email arrived a minute later. The attachment was a photo of a page from my father's personal notebook, the small leather-bound one he kept by his bedside. It was a list of dates, with corresponding 6-figure numbers next to them. The dates perfectly matched the first 3 transfers to the North Swale Trust, and at the bottom of the page, in my father's spiky, impatient handwriting, was a single, damning annotation. D. The question mark hung in the air, a message from beyond the grave. My father, the brilliant logistician, had seen a pattern he couldn't explain. He had seen the flaw in the system. Dahlia hadn't just betrayed his company. She had been betraying him. The day after Maria's call, a package arrived at my office via inter-office mail, a simple brown padded envelope with no return address. My name was typed on the label. Inside, there was no note, only a small, standard-issue USB drive. What made my breath catch in my throat was what it was wrapped in, a small scrap of pale blue satin, frayed at the edges. The fabric was identical to my prom dress. Someone else remembered. Someone else had been watching for a very long time. I took the drive home, and on a secure, offline laptop, I opened its contents. It contained a single folder of scanned images. The images showed a document that had been torn into dozens of pieces and then meticulously, painstakingly taped back together before being scanned. It was a draft, covered in handwritten notes in red ink. The title at the top read, Project Nightingale, a Profit Diversion and Liability Insulation Strategy. It was the blueprint for the entire scheme. It detailed the creation of RFLC, referred to Maria Fletcher by the code name The Nightingale, and outlined the process of faking invoices for non-existent services. In the margins, in what I recognized as Dahlia's sharp, angular handwriting, were notes. Legal exposure? She had written next to one clause, Ivy to manage perception, was scribbled next to another. It was the Rosetta Stone of their conspiracy, rescued from a shredder by an anonymous ally. The allies were not all ghosts. Some of them had faces and names. Mateo, a shift supervisor from the main warehouse, a man who had worked for my father for 20 years, requested a meeting with me. He was nervous, his hands twisting the brim of his baseball cap. Something's not right, Ms. Whitfield, he said, his voice low. After the 11 o'clock shift change, on certain nights, we get these trucks. They're on the manifest for a full load. International shipment, but they're empty. I've been doing this my whole life. You can tell from the way a truck settles on the scales, the sound the hydraulics make. These are ghost trucks. We weigh them. We seal them. We log them as a full 40 tons, but they're rolling out of here with nothing but air. I cross-referenced the dates Mateo gave me with the Shadow Hall invoices, a perfect match. Then, on a hunch, I cross-referenced them with Ivy's Instagram. There it was. On the nights of the ghost shipments, Ivy would invariably post a late-night story. Ivy in a limo, on her way to a party. Ivy on a private jet, a glass of champagne in her hand. The timestamps of her posts, celebrating the life this fraud was funding, corresponded, often to the minute, with the timestamps of Mateo's ghost trucks rolling over the scales. The final piece of the human puzzle came from my own department, a junior auditor named Celine, a bright, fiercely intelligent woman I had personally mentored. She caught me by the coffee machine, her face pale. "Nora," she whispered, "I need to tell you something. 2 months ago, I was running a random spot check on the Ohio subcontractors. I found the 1.1 multiplier error. I flagged it for my direct supervisor." "And what did he say?" I asked, my voice gentle. Her eyes filled with tears. "He told me I was mistaken. He said that some legacy contracts have unique surcharge agreements. He told me to delete my query and to stay away from that block of accounts. He said, 'The COO's office is managing that portfolio directly. Don't touch it.'" She was ashamed of her silence, but I saw only her courage in speaking up now. Dahlia's corruption had cascaded downwards, forcing good people to become complicit. With Maria's testimony, the torn document, Mateo's eyewitness account, and Celine's confirmation, I had more than just data. I had a story, a chorus of voices. I created what we in data security call a clean room. I bought a new laptop, never connected to any network. I consolidated all the evidence, the 217 files, the scans, the photos of my father's notebook, the audio from the prom microphone, onto 3 separate encrypted hard drives. I backed everything up, locked it all down. The password for each drive was the same, a 16-digit string of numbers and letters, the date and time of my senior prom. As I put the final touch on the master file, a timeline that wove every piece of evidence together, the full picture emerged with the clarity of a slow-motion explosion. It was brilliant, in its own dark way, a sophisticated, multi-layered conspiracy that was nearly perfect. They had the corporate structure, the legal insulation, and the PR campaign to cover their tracks. They had planned for every contingency. Except one, they never planned for the quiet, overlooked people they used and threatened along the way. They never planned for a nurse's guilt, a warehouseman's loyalty, an auditor's integrity, or a daughter's memory. They built a fortress of lies, never suspecting that its greatest vulnerability was the simple, unbreakable fact that people remember being hurt. The Ravenfield Foundation's annual fundraising gala was the glittering jewel in Ivy's PR crown. Each year, she selected a theme more extravagant than the last. This year, in what she had deemed a stroke of nostalgic genius. The theme was Prom of the Century, and the venue, chosen for its authentic small-town charm, was the Grayford High School Gymnasium. The same gymnasium where, 16 years ago, I had learned Dahlia's first and most important lesson. The irony was so thick I could taste it, a metallic tang on my tongue like old blood. Returning to that place was a disorienting, hallucinatory experience. The entrance, where I had once stood, clutching wilting gardenias, was now flanked by velvet ropes and spotlights sweeping the night sky. The air no longer smelled of damp grass and teenage desperation. It was thick with the scent of imported lilies and expensive perfume. Inside, Ivy had transformed the cavernous space. The old wooden bleachers were draped in shimmering silver fabric. Pink and purple lights washed over the walls, painting the room in a bruised sunset glow. A string quartet played on a stage erected over the spot where the basketball hoops once hung. It was a perfect, glittering lie, painted over a grimy, painful truth. I wore a simple black dress, a severe minimalist column of fabric that absorbed the light. It was a void in a room of sequins and pastels. On my wrist, I wore a corsage. From a distance, it looked like an exotic, metallic flower, its petals sculpted from dark, burnished silver. But up close, it was a piece of custom technology. The heart of the flower was the lens of a high-definition, broadcast-capable camera. The leaves were micro-antennas. It was a beautiful, terrible thing, a witness. I moved through the crowd, a ghost at the feast. I saw them all, the local politicians, the regional banking executives, the sycophantic donors, all of them orbiting Dahlia and Ivy. My stepmother was radiant in a gown of champagne-colored silk, the benevolent queen of her court. Ivy, in a cloud of pink tulle that mirrored the lighting, was the effervescent princess. They laughed, they schmoozed, they accepted oversized checks with practiced humility. They were selling a fairy tale, and everyone was buying it. The main event began after dinner. The lights dimmed, and the massive LED screen that served as the stage's backdrop flickered to life. It was Ivy's masterpiece, The Ravenfield Story, A Family Legacy. The video opened with a grainy, black-and-white photo of my father as a young man. Full of ambition and drive, it transitioned into a sun-drenched, slow-motion montage of his success, all set to a soaring, inspirational score. Then came Dahlia, introduced as the woman who brought love and light back into his life. The infamous wedding portrait from the lobby filled the screen. There were artfully shot clips of Dahlia walking through warehouses, smiling warmly at employees, then Ivy, talking about her passion for corporate storytelling and continuing her beloved stepfather's vision. I was not in the video. In the official history of the Ravenfield family, I had been completely erased. The video ended with a final, lingering shot of Dahlia, staring thoughtfully out the window of the boardroom, my boardroom, as the Ravenfield logo materialized in gold. The crowd erupted in applause. My hand went to the small, cool metal device in my clutch, a custom-built trigger, synced to a private server I had set up weeks ago. Not yet. The timing had to be perfect. Dahlia took the stage, basking in the applause. She looked out at the sea of adoring faces, her expression one of serene gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice catching with just the right amount of emotion. My husband, Richard, believed that a company was more than just a business. He believed it was a family, a community, and tonight, looking out at all of you, his community, I know his legacy is in the best possible hands. She raised a glass of champagne. "I want to propose a toast," she began, "to the future, to the continued success of a company that is not just about logistics, but about people, to the Ravenfield family." Around the room, hundreds of glasses were raised in unison. That was my cue. As Dahlia's glass reached its apex, my thumb pressed the button in my purse. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. On the massive LED screen behind Dahlia, the golden Ravenfield logo vanished. It was replaced by a stark, black background. White text began to scroll upwards from the bottom of the screen. A silent, relentless cascade of information. It was the Shadow Hall ledger. Invoice numbers, ghost driver names, falsified cargo weights, and the corresponding dollar amounts being funneled into the North Swale Trust. It was cold, ugly, and undeniable, a stock ticker straight from hell, playing out in 20-foot-high letters behind the woman who had orchestrated it all. Simultaneously, a wave of confusion rippled through the audience. People were looking down at their phones. Earlier, they had been encouraged to scan the QR code on their printed invitations to access the Foundation's donation portal. But in the last 60 seconds, I had executed a DNS hijack. The QR code no longer led to a donation page. It led to promarful.com ledger, the public, time-stamped repository of all 217 files. the torn-up profit diversion plan, the photo of my father's notebook, Ivy's Family First Instagram post, Maria Fletcher's signed, notarized affidavit. It was all there, a complete and irrefutable digital case file, delivered simultaneously to the pockets of every influential person in the room. A single collective gasp seemed to suck the air out of the gymnasium. The murmuring started, a low hum that grew into a wave of shocked whispers. The string quartet, confused, began to slow, the notes of their joyful melody turning sour and discordant before petering out into a scraping, uncertain silence. The only sound left was the low hum of the projectors and the frantic, panicked whispers of the guests. Dahlia stood frozen on the stage, her glass still held aloft. She hadn't seen the screen behind her yet, but she could feel the monumental shift in the room's atmosphere. The adoration had evaporated, replaced by a cold, thrilling horror. She lowered her arm, her brow furrowed in confusion, and then she turned. I watched her face as she read the scrolling text on the screen. I watched as her mind processed the invoice numbers, the familiar, damning names. I watched the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin a waxy, translucent white beneath the garish pink lights. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the stage with a sound that was shockingly loud in the dead silence. Her eyes, wide with a dawning, animal terror, scanned the crowd, searching, hunting, and then they found me. I was standing near the back, perfectly still. I met her gaze across the room, across the wreckage of her perfect evening, the practiced, polished smile, the one she had worn for 16 years like a suit of armor, did not fade. It broke. It fell from her face all at once, like a button popping off a dress, leaving the flawed, ugly truth completely exposed. Time seemed to fracture in the gymnasium. The silence stretched, filled with the digital hum of the scrolling ledger and the collective, held breath of 300 people. Dahlia stood on the stage like a woman who had just witnessed her own ghost, her face a mask of disbelief. Ivy was a pale statue in the crowd, her hand clamped over her mouth. The fairy tale was over. It was time to read the footnotes. I began to walk. My footsteps were the only sound, the soft, deliberate tap of my heels on the polished floor. The crowd parted for me, a silent, human sea. I walked past the tables of stunned donors, past the wreckage of Ivy's perfect party, and up the small set of stairs to the stage. Dahlia flinched as I approached. A small, involuntary movement. I didn't look at her. I walked directly to the lectern, moved her scattered, useless note cards aside, and adjusted the microphone. It was still live. I leaned in. My voice, when it came out, was not loud, but it filled every corner of the silent room. It was cold, precise, and devoid of emotion. It was the voice I used to deliver a final audit report. "Good evening," I began. "Earlier tonight, in a private meeting, I was accused of leaking sensitive company data. I was about to be fired to preserve, and I quote, the integrity of the company." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. My eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of journalists, investors, and employees. "I am guilty of bringing data to light," I continued. "But it was not a leak. It was a disclosure. This is the data that you, the stakeholders and the community Ravenfield claims to serve, have every right to know." My fingers moved on the small controller in my hand. On the LED screen behind me, the scrolling ledger of the Shadow Hall contracts dissolved. It was replaced by a grainy black and white video. The timestamp in the corner read 11:47 p.m., 3 months ago. The location stamp read WH4, Bay 7. It was security footage from our main distribution warehouse. The video showed one of Mateo's ghost trucks on the weigh-scale. A figure walks into the frame, instantly recognizable even in the low-resolution footage. It was Ivy, looking impatient, tapping on her phone, the scale operator, a man in an orange safety vest, gestures towards the truck, looking confused. He speaks, and though the audio is faint, his body language is clear. He is questioning the load. Ivy doesn't even look up from her phone at first. Then, she glances at the security camera mounted on the wall, directly at the lens, as if she knows it's there but doesn't care. She says something to the operator, a short, sharp command. The audio is just clear enough to catch the words. Mom said to just scan it through. A collective gasp went through the room. I saw Ivy shrink, trying to disappear into the crowd. I switched the feed. The video was replaced by a screen of pure text, a system log. The accusation against me was supported by a digital log showing my credentials were used to access private files at 2 a.m, I explained, my voice a clinical monotone. That log was accurate. My credentials were used, but they were not used by me. I highlighted a line of code on the screen. This is the installation signature for a piece of spyware called GhostSync, which was found on my machine. It allowed a remote user to operate my computer as if they were me. This signature shows the exact time of installation and the administrative account that authorized it. The highlighted text was stark and damning. User: Ivy, Whitfield, ADM, DPE, Public Relations. The room was utterly still. I had not only proven the fraud, I had proven the frame-up. I had shown them the crime, and then I had shown them the cover-up. Then, I brought it back to the beginning, back to the origin. This was a sophisticated plan, I said, but the methods behind it were not new. They were just scaled up. I played a 5-second clip from the Prom Night recording. I edited out the sound of the blow, the gasp, the physical violence. I left only the voice, Dahlia's voice, 16 years younger but identical in its cold authority. 1, 2, shut your mouth. The audio cut out. On the screen behind me, 2 words appeared in enormous, white letters, in the same elegant font from the fraudulent invoices. Fix your dress. The room held its breath. The letters shimmered for a moment, and then, with a smooth, digital morph, they rearranged themselves. Fix your books. That was it, the entire story. In 4 words. The personal became the professional. The private threat became the public crime. Mr. Sterling, the senior board member, finally found his voice. He scrambled onto the stage, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "This event is over," he announced, his voice trembling. "The board will convene immediately. In the green room, now." He grabbed Dahlia by the elbow, trying to pull her off the stage, away from the prying eyes, back to the world of closed doors where they could manage the damage. Dahlia seemed to break from her trance, allowing herself to be led away. The other board members followed, a small, panicked herd seeking shelter. Sterling glanced back at me. Nora, the green room, 5 minutes. I did not move. I stayed at the lectern, in the full glare of the stage lights. "No," I said, my voice ringing through the microphone again. "I'm not going anywhere. For 16 years. Your method has been to handle things quietly, behind the gym, in private meetings, in closed sessions. It stops tonight. I'm right here, in front of everyone. I think it's time you learned to work in the light." My defiance hung in the air, a direct challenge to their entire way of doing business. And then, something remarkable happened. On the secondary screens dotted around the room, the ones that had been displaying the running total of donations to the foundation, the numbers began to change. A new title appeared above the total. Pledges withdrawn. The number, which had been over $2 million, began to plummet. 100,000 vanished in an instant, then another 50, then 20. The guests, the donors, the pillars of the community were on their phones, in the app, and they were pulling their money. It was a real-time financial vote of no confidence. Each drop in the total was a repudiation of Dahlia, of the board, of the secrets they kept. The fairy tale was being defunded, live, in front of a captive audience. Then, from the back of the room, came a sound, a single person, clapping. It wasn't loud or enthusiastic. It was slow, deliberate, and thoughtful. I saw it was Mateo, the warehouse supervisor, his arms crossed, his face grim but resolute. Then another person joined in, a woman from accounting, then one of the journalists. It was not an ovation, it was a scattered, sparse, almost reluctant applause. But it was enough. It was the sound of a spell breaking, the sound of a story ending. It was the sound of the truth, finally, getting the last word. The boys' varsity locker room at Grayford High had not changed in 16 years. It still smelled of stale sweat, industrial disinfectant, and the faint, lingering ghost of teenage arrogance. This was the green room Mr. Sterling had chosen for our emergency session. There was no polished obsidian table here. Instead, 2 metal folding tables had been hastily shoved together. The board members, stripped of the gala's pomp and circumstance, sat on squeaking, mismatched folding chairs under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. It was a humiliating, undignified setting. It was perfect. Dahlia was the first to speak, her voice a low, furious tremor that vibrated with barely suppressed rage. She was no longer performing. This was the real Dahlia, the one from behind the bleachers. "This has gone far enough," she hissed, her eyes locking onto Sterling. "She has single-handedly destroyed the reputation of this company in one evening. She has incited a panic, libeled her colleagues, and illegally disseminated confidential corporate information. I don't care what fantasies she's peddling. For the good of Ravenfield Logistics, she needs to be terminated, immediately, and then she needs to be sued into oblivion." She was trying to wrestle back control, to frame this as my insanity, my crime. But the fear in the room was no longer directed at me. It was directed at the flashing screens of their own phones, at the impending legal and financial cataclysm I had unleashed. I didn't respond to her outburst. Instead, I walked around the makeshift table and placed a thin black folder in front of each board member. Dahlia was the only one I skipped. "What is this?" Croft, the sharp, analytical one, asked, his hand hovering over the folder as if it might be spring-loaded. "A personalized summary," I said, my voice calm and even, "of your own due diligence, or lack thereof." Sterling opened his first. His face went slack. On the top sheet was a copy of the minutes from a board meeting 9 months ago. I had highlighted a specific line item he had personally championed: a 40% budget increase for proactive brand management initiatives. Ivy's department. On the page next to it, I had printed the bank transfer record from the following day, showing the first major deposit from Ravenfield's accounts into the North Swale Trust. The numbers matched to the dollar. I had one for each of them. For Croft, it was a chain of emails in which he dismissed an internal red flag about RFLC, calling it a minor vendor anomaly and instructing the audit committee to focus on higher priority targets. For the 2 younger members, it was documentation of the unusually generous stock options Dahlia had granted them upon her appointment as acting COO, with the authorization time-stamped the same hour she signed the first Shadow Hall contract. It wasn't direct proof of their complicity, it was proof of their negligence, their willful blindness, their greed. It was enough to tie them to the sinking ship. "This is outrageous," Sterling sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking at his signature on the document, not at me. Before anyone else could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. "My apologies for the intrusion." A man in a severe, dark suit stood in the doorway. He was not a board member. I recognized him instantly. Julian Hayes, senior partner at the city's most ruthless corporate law firm. His client was Marcus Thorne, the billionaire philanthropist who had just publicly withdrawn the largest pledge of the night. Hayes was not here to be polite. He was here to represent the money. "Mr. Thorne and several other key investors have asked me to observe," Hayes said, his eyes sweeping over the pathetic scene. "They have significant concerns about corporate governance and potential shareholder fraud. They have authorized me to state that unless this board takes immediate, decisive, and transparent action, a class action lawsuit will be filed at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning." The threat landed with the force of a physical blow. Dahlia stared at him, her mouth opening and closing silently. Her power had been absolute within the walls of Ravenfield Tower. But here, in this locker room, faced with the real-world consequences. She was just a defendant. "The evidence is clear," I said, taking back control. I nodded to a small tablet I had placed on the table. "And it doesn't just come from me." I tapped the screen. The face of Celine, the junior auditor, appeared, live from a secure video call. She looked terrified, but resolute. "Celine," I said gently, "can you please repeat for the board what your supervisor told you when you flagged the invoice irregularities?" Her voice was shaky, but her words were clear. "He told me to delete the query," he said, and I wrote it down. "The COO's office is managing that portfolio directly. Don't touch it." I thanked her and ended the call. "The COO's office," I repeated, looking directly at Dahlia. I tapped the screen again. This time, it was a floor plan of our corporate headquarters. A red line traced a path from the executive parking garage, up the private elevator, to the PR department. "This is Ivy Whitfield's keycard access log from the night the GhostSync malware was installed on my computer. It shows her entering the PR offices at 1:58 a.m. and leaving at 2:21 a.m. The malware installation was completed at 2:13 a.m. Ivy, who had been huddled in a corner, let out a choked sob. I didn't know what it was. Mom just told me to put a software update on your machine. She said it was for system security." "And finally," I said, my voice dropping, "the linchpin of your entire scheme." I played a new audio file. It was a voice message, the sound raw and uncompressed. It was Maria Fletcher. "I'm not a criminal," her voice wept. "She told me it was a special payroll fund for employees whose paychecks were late because of the accounting transition after Mr. Whitfield died. She said my name on it would make it faster. A way to help people. She said it was what Richard would have wanted." The message ended with a shuddering sob. The room was a tomb. The fraud, the cover-up, the coercion, the exploitation of a dying man's memory. It was all laid bare on the scuffed linoleum floor of a high school locker room. Julian Hayes, the lawyer, spoke into the silence. "Speaking on behalf of my clients, I would suggest that the first act of decisive action would be the immediate suspension of Ms. Dahlia Whitfield from all duties, pending a full, independent, and externally managed investigation." That was it, the pivot, the moment the world turned. "This is my company," Dahlia shrieked, her voice cracking. "You cannot do this." "It is a publicly traded company," Hayes corrected her, his voice like ice. "And its shareholders are about to lose a great deal of money. They can, and they will, do this." I stood up. "I have a proposal," I said. All eyes turned to me. "First, we go public. A full press release tonight, acknowledging the internal investigation and the suspension of the acting COO. Second, we announce that all donations from this evening's event will be returned, in full, with an apology. Third, effective immediately, we establish a fully anonymous, externally managed whistleblower hotline for all Ravenfield employees. And fourth, you appoint an interim chief operating officer to manage this crisis and stabilize the company for the next 60 days. Sterling looked at me, a flicker of something, fear, respect, desperation in his eyes. "And who would you propose for that role?" "Me," I said. The vote was a formality, a ritual of surrender. Hayes watched, a silent executioner. All in favor of the immediate suspension of Dahlia Whitfield as acting COO? 6 hands went up. Only Dahlia's remained on the table, clenched into a white-knuckled fist. All in favor of appointing Nora Whitfield as acting COO for a term of 60 days? 5 hands. Sterling hesitated, then slowly raised his. Croft and the 2 junior members followed. Only Dahlia and one other, a man deeply tied to her old alliances, abstained. The motion carried. It was over. A junior legal aide produced a pre-printed resolution document and a pen. There was nowhere clean to sign it. So, he placed the single sheet of paper on the faded blue top of a nearby basketball-shaped table, the kind used for team meetings. He pushed it towards me, I leaned over, my hand steady, and signed my name. The line for my signature was directly over the thick, white-painted arc of the free throw line. A boundary. A new beginning. I had fixed the books. I left the locker room before the others. I didn't want to see the aftermath. The awkward gathering of coats, the averted eyes, the frantic, whispered phone calls to lawyers and PR firms. I had presented the data. The system was now processing it. My work, in that room, was done. I pushed open a heavy side door and stepped out into the night. The air was cool and clean, a welcome shock after the stale, superheated atmosphere of the gymnasium and the sour tang of the locker room. I was behind the gym, on the edge of the darkened football field, the same patch of earth. 16 years had passed, and yet the smell was identical, a deep, loamy scent of damp soil and cut grass, overlaid with the faint, phantom smell of floor varnish. It was the smell of my own history. The gala was over, but its sad, glittering detritus remained. A few silver and pink balloons, having escaped their moorings, drifted lazily across the asphalt, nudging against my ankles like lost pets. The spotlights that had announced the party's glamour were now switched off, and the only illumination came from a single, humming security light mounted high on the brick wall. It cast a harsh, lonely circle of white light, making the shadows at its edges seem deeper and darker. This was the true face of the place, stripped of Ivy's theatrical lighting. This was the stage as I remembered it. I heard a sound behind me, sharp and rhythmic against the silence, the click-clack of high heels on pavement. It was a sound I had associated with power for most of my life, the sound of Dahlia approaching a boardroom, a dinner table, a terrified teenage girl, but now it sounded different, brittle, isolated. It was just a noise, no longer a herald. She stopped about 10 feet away from me, just inside the edge of the security light's cold glare. She had a thin wrap pulled around her shoulders, a useless defense against the chill. Her face was pale, stripped of its public mask. The makeup seemed to sit on her skin like a layer of fine dust. There was no audience here, no board to persuade, no donors to charm. There was only the damp grass, the defeated balloons, and me. She looked at the empty bleachers, at the dark field stretching out into the night, as if seeing it for the first time. For a long minute, she said nothing. The wind rustled the leaves of the old oak tree at the edge of the field, a dry, whispering sound. Finally, she spoke. Her voice not a shriek or a hiss, but a low, raspy thing, hoarse from a battle she hadn't even realized she was losing until it was over. It was the voice of the Prom Night recording, scraped raw by time and defeat. "Are you happy?" The question was so simple, so direct, so profoundly beside the point. It was the question of a victor to the vanquished, the only framework she understood. She was searching for a motive she could comprehend, joy in her suffering, a triumphant glee. She wanted this to be a simple, emotional transaction, a story of personal revenge. I thought about the question. I searched myself for the feeling she was asking about. Happiness. It was a foreign country. I felt quiet, a vast, empty quiet, where the roaring engine of 16 years of meticulous, cold rage had finally sputtered and died. The work was done. The books were balanced. The feeling that remained was not joy. It was just stillness. "No," I said, and the honesty of it felt clean in the cool night air. "I'm not happy." I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes. This was not the answer she expected. "But the company will be safer," I added. "The numbers will be real. That's enough." That she could not understand at all. To her, the company, the numbers, they were just tools, instruments for acquiring power and wealth. They were not a purpose in themselves. I had corrected a system. She believed I had just settled a personal score. We were speaking two different languages. She reached into the small, elegant clutch she was still holding. For a moment, I thought she might pull out a weapon, but what she produced was a photograph, its glossy surface catching the light. She held it out to me. It wasn't an offering. It was an accusation. It was the wedding photo, the one from the lobby. My father, looking vaguely uncomfortable but resolute, shaking her hand as if closing a deal. Dahlia, radiant, victorious. Her eyes already looking past him, towards the empire she was acquiring. It was the founding document of their union, their brand, the declaration that had erased my mother and set the course for everything that followed. I took it from her. The paper felt cool and slick in my hand. I looked at my father's face. I saw the weariness in his eyes, the deep lines of a man who had built everything and trusted no one, until he made one final, catastrophic error in judgment. I looked at Dahlia's smiling face, a perfect mask of bridal joy concealing a predator's ambition. I saw the entire story in that single, frozen moment, the lie, the foundation of the rot. I held it for 3 seconds, then I handed it back to her. Her hand trembled slightly as she took it. My refusal to engage with it, to be wounded by it, seemed to unnerve her more than anything else that night. It was her last piece of leverage, her last attempt to claim a shared history, and I had treated it like a piece of irrelevant data. "I created you," she said, her voice low and venomous. She tucked the photo away, her last relic. "Everything you are, your ambition, your ruthlessness, your attention to detail, that all came from me. I forged you in this very spot." It was her final, desperate attempt to claim ownership, to cast herself not as the villain, but as the creator, the dark mother of my success. She needed to believe that, even in her defeat, she was the author of my story. "No," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. I looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time without the filter of fear or anger. I saw a woman hollowed out by her own ambition, a ghost haunting the ruins of her own creation. "You didn't create me, you just created the motive." A car crunched softly on the gravel of the service road behind us. 2 figures got out. They were not police, they were private security. The firm the board kept on retainer. They were dressed in discreet, dark suits. One of them, a calm, professional-looking man, approached us. He did not look at me. He addressed only Dahlia, his voice polite, deferential, but immovable. "Ms. Dahlia," he said, "your car is ready, if you please." This was how it ended, not with a shout, but with a quiet, courteous dismissal. The system she had built to protect herself was now politely, inexorably escorting her away. She stared at me for a long moment, her face a blank canvas. Then, without another word, she turned and walked towards the waiting car, the sound of her heels a final, fading staccato in the night. I stood alone for a while after she was gone. The only sound was the wind. I looked down at my wrist, at the cold, metallic corsage that had served as my silent witness. My camera, its job was done, the recording was over. Slowly, I unclasped it. The metal felt heavy in my palm. I walked over to the concrete steps leading up to the gym's side door, the same steps I had stumbled down 16 years ago. I bent down and placed the silver flower on the cold, worn concrete. It looked like a small, strange memorial. A final invoice, paid in full. The currency was silence. I stood up and pulled my thin coat tighter around me. The wind picked up, catching the black fabric and making it flutter behind me. For a fleeting second, it might have looked like a flag, a banner of victory, but it wasn't. It was just a piece of cloth, offering little warmth against the sudden, piercing cold. I walked back into the gymnasium. The transformation was complete. It was no longer a party, a crime scene, or a courtroom. It was simply a room full of bewildered people slowly gathering their things, speaking in the hushed, respectful tones usually reserved for funerals. The glittering fantasy Ivy had constructed had been dismantled in less than 10 minutes, collapsing into a sad collection of deflating balloons and half-empty champagne glasses. The board members were gone, having scurried out of the locker room to their waiting cars. Julian Hayes, the lawyer, was waiting for me by the stage. He was a man who thrived in the sterile environment of a crisis. and his calm was a stark contrast to the quiet chaos around him.
"Ms. Whitfield," he said, his voice a low hum of professional efficiency. "A commendable presentation."
It was a disclosure, I corrected him, my voice flat. I took a small, encrypted hard drive from my clutch. It was a mirror copy of the one I had built in my clean room. This is everything, the full data set, all supporting evidence, affidavits, and my own timeline. It belongs to the independent investigation now. He took the drive, his fingers closing around it as if it were a sacred object. "We'll begin at dawn. You'll have our full preliminary report within 72 hours. "I expect nothing less," I said. I turned to my laptop, which was still open on the lectern. With a few keystrokes, I initiated the shutdown sequence for the Promerful com/ledger website. A command prompt asked me if I was sure. I typed "Y" and hit enter. The public record vanished. Its purpose had been served. It was a tool for leverage, not a permanent monument to my family's disgrace. The hapless MC, who had been hiding backstage, chose that moment to reappear. He scurried to the microphone, his face a painful mask of forced cheerfulness. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming artificially into the quiet room, Let's not let this slight interruption spoil a wonderful evening of charity. The band is ready to play, so let's get back to the dance floor." A few people stared at him with blank incomprehension. He was a relic from another era, a man still reading from a script that had been set on fire. I walked over and took the microphone from his hand. I didn't have to raise my voice. "The gala is over," I said. The words echoed with a finality that brooked no argument. "Thank you all for your attendance. Please get home safely." I left the stage and walked through the thinning crowd. No one spoke to me. No one touched me. They just watched me pass, their eyes full of a mixture of awe, fear, and pity. In the space of an hour, I had become something other, a force of nature that had just swept through their comfortable, predictable world. Back in the quiet solitude of the empty locker room, I took out my phone. I opened a pre-written draft in my email client. The recipient list was all employees, Ravenfield Logistics. The subject line was a new ledger. The body of the email contained only a single sentence. "Effective tonight, we fix the books. We do not fix the dresses." I hit send. Within minutes, the official Ravenfield social media accounts, now under my direct control via a password change I had initiated from the stage, posted a new, stark message. It was a simple black square with white text. It acknowledged a leadership transition, the launch of an independent investigation into significant financial irregularities, and a complete commitment to transparency moving forward. It provided a timeline for the investigation's initial findings, and at the bottom, it listed the phone number and web address for the new, completely anonymous employee whistleblower hotline. The fairy tale was officially dead. The autopsy had begun. I scrolled through my phone, my thumb hovering over a single audio file. Prom Night, Rec. 2009. For 16 years, that file had been my darkest secret, my source of strength, my private shame, and my ultimate weapon. I had transferred it from device to device, a digital ghost that followed me through my life. Its purpose was now complete. It had been the key, but the door was now open. Keeping it would be like a soldier keeping the pin from a grenade he'd already thrown. I held down the icon. A small menu appeared. Delete. My thumb pressed down. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this item?" the phone asked. Yes. The file vanished. I felt a sudden, unexpected lightness in my chest, as if a physical weight had been lifted. From across the gymnasium, I saw Ivy. She was standing alone near the draped bleachers, her pink dress looking garish and childish in the harsh, functional light the maintenance crew had just switched on. Her face was stained with tears. She was looking at me, her expression not hateful, but lost. She was a casualty, a pampered, willing accomplice who never understood the game she was playing until the board was flipped over. She had been a tool, and she had been discarded. I held her gaze for a single, Silent second. Then, I turned away. I did not look back. The last of the guests shuffled out. The catering staff began to clear the tables with a clatter of plates and glasses. The maintenance crew started breaking down the stage. The magic was being dismantled, packed away into boxes. The room was just a gymnasium again. I walked to the main doors, the ones that opened onto the front parking lot. I pushed one open and stood on the threshold, looking out into the night. The air was calm. A light rain had begun to fall, washing the pavement clean. I took a deep breath, and then another, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, for the first time since I was a teenager in a pale blue dress, I didn't smell the cloying, ancient scent of floor varnish. I didn't smell the memory of humiliation. All I could smell was the clean, sharp, unambiguous scent of new paper. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know. It's amazing to see how stories can connect us all. If you enjoyed this, please consider hitting that subscribe button and giving this video a thumbs up, and to help this story reach even more people, please support it by hitting the hype button. It truly makes a huge difference. Thank you again for being here.